PDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and which is worse, Armageddon or Mindslicer? This video is sort of a thought experiment similar to what I did with my Stifle versus Swords video, where I was just comparing the two and talking about, in certain situations, a lot of times Stifle can be actually better than Swords, even though Swords is essentially considered to be one of the best removal spells in the entire format. This is a similar theme where I'm comparing two cards, but more so what those cards are doing, right? Obviously, Armageddon is going to destroy all lands, and Mindslicer is going to make everyone discard their hands. And the idea for this video stemmed from a question that one of my patrons gave me. I'll give a shout out to Isaiah, who sort of sparked this idea, and he wanted to know which was worse, letting your opponents have extra mana or letting them have extra cards. And my answer was that it's very situational. Could be bad to give them lots of mana if they already have lots of cards in hand, but ultimately drawing cards is way better than getting mana. This is why I think Rhystic Study is way better than Smothering Tithe. Lots of mana and no cards means you do nothing. Lots of cards and no mana means you slowly do things or wait till you draw lands. I like the second situation better. Then I made the statement, in fact, I would almost rather see an Armageddon in a game than a Mindslicer, but that's just me. Now, I know a lot of people would disagree with this situation. In fact, mass land destruction in general is frowned upon in the format, and a lot of people, if you cast an Armageddon, will just scoop and call it a day. But a lot of times, being empty-handed can be even worse. And I added to this discussion by saying, think about it. On turn 7, you want 7 lands in play and no cards in hand, or 7 cards in hand and no land. Which is worse? So which is worse? Would you rather have 7 cards in your hand and someone just cast an Armageddon, or no cards in hand because someone just sacrificed their Mindslicer, but you have 7 lands in play? Now, keep in mind, I know Armageddon sounds really bad, and I'm not advocating for it here at all. Again, this is just a thought experiment. All I'm saying is destroying all lands, yes, really, really bad, but chances are you probably have a lot of stuff in play already, right? You probably have mana rocks. You probably have some creatures. You got some enchantments. You got artifacts that do other stuff. It's not going to destroy your entire board. It's not like you're going back to square one, just destroying the lands, and then you still have all your other stuff in play. And a lot of times, having like your commander in play, for example, can be a lot better. In fact, there are some decks out there, probably quite a few aggro decks in particular, that destroying all the lands but leaving all your creatures in play can actually be beneficial for you, right? You could even make this discussion, what's worse, an Armageddon or a Wrath of God, right? Because for some decks, a Wrath of God actually would be worse than an Armageddon. But basically what it boils down to is people want to be doing stuff, right? Whenever I talk about the most hated strategies in the format, a lot of times people are like, I don't want to be just sitting around doing nothing. I want to do stuff. So in that situation, again, we're talking about like turn 7 here, right? So you've done lots of stuff. You probably have your commander in play. You got some mana rocks, some other stuff. Which is going to be worse? Is it going to be worse for doing stuff, right? For actually playing the game? Is it going to be worse to have no lands, or is it going to be worse to have no cards in your hand? And I think for me, it always depends on the situations, but typically on like turn 7 or 8, I think I would rather have a full hand and no lands than have an empty hand with plenty of lands that aren't really doing me a whole lot because I don't have anything to do with them, right? I've run into this situation a lot. Again, with Smothering Tithe as an example, I can't count how many times back in the early days of playing Smothering Tithe where I would have it sitting in play with my mono white deck, no cards in hand, and tons of treasures lying around that I could do absolutely nothing with. I would much rather have a full hand and slowly be casting stuff, right? Slowly drawing lands off the top, playing 1 land per turn, just like you would in the start of any game. You start the game with no lands in play, right? I would much rather have that, right? That's essentially how the game starts, is you have 7 cards in hand and nothing in play, than be in the situation where I got lots of lands and I'm just top decking, right? I'm just hoping I get something useful off the top. Oh, it's another land, so I guess I'll just sit here and do nothing for another turn cycle, right? That to me is less fun. I mean, obviously it depends on the situation. For each individual person, it might be different. Some people are just so dead set against mass land destruction that pretty much makes up their mind, and it doesn't matter what the situation is. Again, I'm not advocating for mass land destruction in casual games here, but at the end of the day, I think for most casual players, you want to be doing stuff, right? You want to be active in the game. And, you know, from what I've noticed through my experience, being empty-handed is the thing that will keep you inactive in the game more than anything else, right? That's why card draw is so important in the format, because once you're empty-handed, you're just sitting there really doing nothing, just hoping you draw gas off the top. And unless you refill your hand some way, there's no way to get out of that, right? The land destruction situation, you'll eventually get your lands back, right? You'll get mana rocks, you'll draw into ramp and stuff like that, just like you do in the beginning of the game. The empty-handed situation can sometimes, you'll get stuck in that rut and never get out of it, right? Unless you draw into some big draw spell or a wheel that's going to refill your hand. For the rest of the game, you're just sitting there drawing one card per turn and doing not very much at all. It is always going to be situational, of course. There's always situations where you probably want lots of lands in play. There's situations where you probably want more cards in your hand. But at the end of the day, if I was being as unbiased as I could about it, I would say that later in the game, I would probably rather see an Armageddon than have someone make me discard my entire hand. Basically, what's worse, having all your lands destroyed or having no cards in hand? That's basically what I'm talking about in this video. Again, just a thought experiment, right? Just sort of gets the ball rolling. I know that a lot of people really hate mass land destruction in the format, but there are things that are actually worse in my opinion. But let me know your opinion in the comments below. I always love doing videos like this to sort of get the wheels turning and getting people thinking about these sort of situations. Just a fun thought experiment, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.